told him we wanted to get married. He said, sure, right now. So that was the difference between the priests. And so he, after he married us, he gave Hilda a little book and says, study this book, and he says, I don't think you'll read it, but I'm supposed to give it to you. So then when we had 6 children, I was so proud of them that I wished I could have waited, or rather, I wished Father Valenta could have seen him. Okay, let's go back to Robert and me. And when we were in the service together, we got inducted into the Army in 1942 in Fort Walters in Wichita Falls. And so we, both the class of 45 and the class of 44, which was Robert's and mine, were inducted at the same time, and we went to, after we were made privates in the Army, they shipped us back to A&M, and we were privates in the Army, but still taking Bulltex, or military science as it's known as. And so again, Robert's one year behind me, and I'm 1 year ahead of him. I took engineering and was at Walton Hall. I may have already said that. Robert was in agriculture and H infantry in the new area, and we got together every chance every time opportunity we had. Then on the Christmas season of my sophomore year and Robert's freshman year, he and I got together and hitchhiked from College Station to Shreveport, Louisiana, where our brother Herbert was in the service at Barksdale Field, and we visited with him for a few days and then hitchhiked back to Sugar Land. And trying to get out of Louisiana, we had a little trouble, and no one would pick us up. Although we thumbed it, and there were 2 of us there, they just passed us up. Finally, one guy wanted to give us a ride, but he wanted us to pay for part of the gasoline. And Robert says, no, we're not about to pay for any gasoline. He says, he can take us without us having to pay. Well, actually, you know, we didn't have any money anyway. There was a time there when I went on a corps trip with 75 cents in my back pocket, and when I came back, I think I still had 42 cents. So that's what we, as Aggies, would spend, was very little, and we were always eating well, and we ate with our friends. I know we stayed with Clarence Hart in I believe it was DeRidder, Louisiana. Now, DeRidder and Barksdale Field are not exactly together, so I may be wrong about the posts there. But I know that Robert and I were, I'm going to say, inseparable. But we weren't really that close either. In other words, Robert went his way, I went my way. And it was that way all through life. And even when we were in Europe together in World War II, Robert was stationed with the infantry in Austria, and I was with the engineers in Italy. And so I don't remember the occasion, but he hitchhiked down from Austria, and I think he told me that he rode every mode of transportation there was. But I know what he's talking about, because when I was sent overseas, I was told to be at the port of embarkation at Hampton Roads in Virginia. And I took every means of transportation to get there that I could. I rode a Jeep, I rode a bus, I rode a train, and finally hitchhiked and reported into the orderly room there during daylight hours of the 17th of May. And I said, well, here I am. this guy said, well, you're the third one that's come in and talked to me like that. He said, put your bag down and go over there to the mess hall and get you something to eat, and then find you a room in that barracks over there, and then we'll talk to you again in the morning. So that urgency of getting there during daylight hours was the Army's way of telling us, don't fool around, buddy, get here on time. So I've tried to be on time since then. But anyway, then when we get to Europe, and Robert's in Austria and I'm down in Italy, he hitchhiked down there to visit me. And he and I spent 3 days together while I was staging basically for the Pacific. And I was at Leghorn, or Livorno, as they called it in Italy. And we played baseball, softball with a hospital unit one evening, and they needed a driver. And I said, well, Robert's a good driver. He'll drive you in the Jeep. So I don't know how many people he took. And I went with mine. I wasn't driving because I was a shaved head about that time. That's a second lieutenant in the Army. But we played ball and with the hospital unit that were all officers. And they were all doctors and officers in the Army. And Robert says, man, he says, these are friendly people. I said, well, sure they are. He said, well, my unit would not treat us this way. He says, they'd make us toe the line. So he got to see how the other half lived, I guess you might say. But then when the war ended and Robert went his way, I had already told him that I was going to the Pacific. And we left Leghorn, and it took us 3 days to get through the Straits of Gibraltar. And the reason for that was they were having the invasion of Normandy, and the ships that they were carrying the troops coming through the Straits of Gibraltar had priority over our troop ship that was going to the Pacific. And so we spent a while just treading water until they got through, and then we started on out. Well, we got to opposite the Azores, and I tell it like this, and I'm not sure about my geography too well, but when we were headed to the Pacific, the war ended in Europe when we were right opposite the Azores. When we got that news that the war had ended, they diverted our ship to the States, and Robert was back in Europe, wherever he was, so he could convey to Mom and Daddy that I was going to the Pacific. And when I got home, let me stop and retract just a little bit. When we landed in Boston Harbor, there was a big storm in Texas, had blown down the communications and everything, so we couldn't get word to Mom and Daddy that I was home. So I just took a bus and again hitchhiked every way I could, and when I walked into Mom and Daddy's house at 11 o'clock at night and knocked on the door, and William came to the door. And then Daddy had been in the shower, or bathtub. I don't think we had a shower. Well, anyway, when he came out, he threw his arms around me and he said, oh, Robert, he says, I'm so glad to see you and everything. I said, Daddy, he says, you better look again. I says, I'm not Robert, I'm Max. So that surprised him. So then kind of fast forward again, while I was at home, and if I'm not mistaken, it was right about that time, well, Ernest and Dorothy Redmond were living across the street in the old, I'm not going to think of that name now, the house that used to be, not Hathaway, But anyway, living across the street from Mom and Daddy, and we had that hedge around the front of our house, and I was shearing that hedge in the afternoon, and at the same time, I was watching this girl across the street that was Ernest Redmond's sister, and it ended up to where she was Hilda Redmond. And so William asked me if I would care to double date with him, and he was going to date Winnie Wade, and I was going to date Hilda. So that's the way it was the first night. I don't know how many times we had a date, but and I don't remember where we went. Of course, at that time I had a little more money than we ordinarily would have had since I had been in the service. So